In the winter of 1872, in a broken volcanic landscape on the California-Oregon border, a small group of Modoc people made one of the most astonishing stands in American frontier history. They were not an army. They were not a nation with factories, railroads, or supply lines. They were fewer than 200 people, including women and children, and among them, only a few dozen fighting men. Yet from the jagged trenches of the lava beds, they held off hundreds, then more than 1,000 U.S. troops. This was the Modoc War, a short war, a brutal war. A war born from broken treaties, forced removal, hunger, mistrust, and one desperate question: who gets to remain on the land they call home? The Modoc homeland lay around Tule Lake and Lost River, in what is now northeastern California and southern Oregon. This was a hard landscape, but not an empty one. To outsiders, it could look barren: lava rock, sagebrush, dry winds, and wide skies. To the Modoc, it was home. It had food, memory, burial places, routes, water, stories. The Modoc hunted, fished, gathered, traded, and moved with the seasons. Their world was not random wandering. It was a system, a geography of survival. Then came the 19th century. Fur traders came first, then settlers, then miners, then ranchers. Land that had long sustained native communities was now seen as property, opportunity, profit. By the 1860s, the United States wanted the Modoc removed from their homeland. In 1864, the Modoc signed a treaty agreeing to move to the Klamath Reservation in Oregon. But reservation life was not what had been promised. The land was not their land. There were shortages. There were rivalries and tensions with the Klamath people already living there. Protection and supplies promised by the government were inconsistent. One Modoc leader, Kintpwash, better known to Americans as Captain Jack, eventually led his people away from the reservation and back toward Lost River. To the Modoc, this was not rebellion, it was return. Captain Jack is often presented as the central figure of the Modoc War. But he was not a simple war chief thirsting for conflict. He was under pressure from all sides. The United States wanted him back on the reservation. Settlers wanted the Modoc gone. Some Modoc wanted peace. Others believed compromise had already failed. Captain Jack tried to hold a fragile middle ground: keep his people near their homeland, avoid full war, and secure a small reservation at Lost River. But by late 1872, Washington had lost patience. President Ulysses S. Grant ordered the Modoc back to the Klamath Reservation by force. In November 1872, U.S. soldiers arrived at Lost River to compel Captain Jack's band to return. The confrontation turned violent. Shots were fired, people were killed. Captain Jack's group fled south toward Tule Lake and into the lava beds. There, the war changed. Because the lava beds were not just a hiding place, they were a fortress. The place now called Captain Jack's Stronghold was formed by ancient lava flows. It was a maze of jagged rock, caves, cracks, trenches, and low walls. For the Modoc, who knew the terrain intimately, it was ideal defensive ground. For the U.S. Army, it was a nightmare. Soldiers could not see where the fire was coming from. Horses struggled, artillery was difficult to use. Men were exposed while the Modoc moved through natural trenches almost invisibly. In January 1873, U.S. troops launched an attack on the Stronghold. It failed. The Modoc, vastly outnumbered, repelled them. The army took serious casualties. The Modoc suffered little or no loss in that battle. This humiliation shocked the army and drew national attention. Newspapers began following the story. Americans were fascinated and outraged that such a small group could defy the U.S. military. But inside the Stronghold, life was not glorious. It was cold. Supplies were limited. Families were trapped. Every day carried the fear of assault, hunger, betrayal, or death. And still Captain Jack hoped for a settlement. He wanted a reservation at Lost River. Not empire. Not conquest. A small homeland. After the failed military assault, the government tried negotiation. A peace commission was formed. Among the American representatives was General Edward Canby, a respected U.S. Army officer. Also involved were Reverend Eleazar Thomas, Alfred Meacham, and Indian agent Leroy Dyer. The talks depended heavily on interpreters. One of the most important figures was Toby Riddle, also known as Winema, a Modoc woman married to Frank Riddle. She moved between worlds: Modoc and American, indigenous and settler, war camp and negotiation table. She warned the commissioners that danger was coming. They did not listen. Inside the Modoc camp, the leadership was divided. Captain Jack reportedly resisted killing the peace commissioners. But other Modoc men, especially those who feared punishment for earlier killings, pushed for a violent act. They believed killing the American leaders might force the army to leave. It was a terrible miscalculation. On April 11, 1873, the peace meeting took place near the Stronghold. The Modoc arrived armed. When General Canby again refused Captain Jack's demand for a Lost River reservation, the meeting collapsed. Captain Jack shot Canby. Other Modoc opened fire. General Canby and Reverend Thomas were killed. Alfred Meacham was badly wounded but survived. Dyer and the Riddles escaped. The killing of Canby changed everything. He became the only U.S. general killed during the Indian Wars. For the U.S. government and the American public, negotiation was now over. The war would be finished by force. 4 days later, the army attacked again. This time, the aim was to surround the stronghold and crush the resistance. But when soldiers finally captured the position, they found it empty. The Modoc had slipped away through the lava trenches during the night. They were still alive, still moving, still fighting. Then, on April 26th, a U.S. patrol led by Captain Evan Thomas and Lieutenant Thomas Wright went searching for them. The patrol stopped for lunch. The Modoc struck. In less than an hour, much of the patrol was killed or wounded. Thomas and Wright both died. The ambush was another severe blow to the army. But the Modoc position was weakening. They were divided, hungry, short on ammunition, hunted from multiple directions. The army kept tightening the circle. On May 10th, the Modoc suffered a defeat at Dry Lake. After that, the unity of the resistance began to break apart. Some bands surrendered, others scattered. The pressure became unbearable. By June 1873, Captain Jack surrendered. The military phase of the Modoc War was over. The punishment was just beginning. Captain Jack and several Modoc leaders were imprisoned at Fort Klamath. They were tried by a military commission for the killing of the peace commissioners. Captain Jack, Shanchin John, Black Jim, and Boston Charlie were sentenced to death. On October 3, 1873, they were hanged. The execution was public. Other Modoc were forced to watch. 2 other men, Barncho and Slowlux, had their death sentences commuted and were sent to Alcatraz. The surviving Modoc were not allowed to remain in their homeland. More than 150 were sent by train to Indian Territory in what is now Oklahoma. Many were transported in terrible conditions. They arrived cold, hungry, and destitute. Exile did what the army could not fully do in the lava beds. It broke the Modoc away from the landscape that had sustained their identity. Some survived. Many did not. Decades later, in 1909, the U.S. allowed some Modoc to return to Oregon. Only a portion went back. Others remained in Oklahoma, where the Modoc Nation continues today. The Modoc War lasted only months, but it tells a much larger story. It was not simply a battle between Captain Jack and the U.S. Army. It was a collision between 2 visions of land. For the United States, land was surveyed, sold, fenced, settled, and controlled. For the Modoc, land was relationship. Food, ancestors, memory, survival. The war also exposes the fatal weakness of American treaty-making in the 19th century. Promises were made, then underfunded, ignored, or broken. When Native people resisted the consequences, they were called hostile. Captain Jack's story is especially tragic because he tried, for a time, to avoid the worst outcome. He wanted his people to stay near Lost River. He asked for a homeland small enough to be politically possible, but meaningful enough to preserve a people. He did not get it. The killing of the peace commissioners was real. It was violent. It cannot be excused. But it also did not emerge from nowhere. It came after years of displacement, fear, broken trust, and a reservation system that had failed the Modoc long before the first shot was fired. Today, Captain Jack's stronghold is preserved within Lava Beds National Monument. Visitors can walk through the same black rock trenches where the Modoc held out against overwhelming force. The place is quiet now. No gunfire, no soldiers, no families hiding in the rocks. Only wind. And the uneasy memory of a small people who asked to remain home, fought from the lava, and paid almost everything for it. The Modoc War was short, but its question remains enormous. When a people are pushed from their homeland and every peaceful path fails, what choices are left?